This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. I'll say Happy New Year again, why not? So before 2024 kicked off, I actually started putting together a little bit of a preset for the GT1000 core. In the comments, you occasionally, when you're doing some of these comparisons and things, you get people bring up the GT1000 core. Occasionally, like it doesn't happen that often. I think the GT1000 has kind of flown under the radar, and I wanted to maybe explore some of why that might be in this video. If that's at all interesting, I guess if you're watching this video, you're maybe either interested in the GT1000 core or modelling in general or whatever. So the GT1000 core is basically pretty much as powerful as the GT1000, which is fairly powerful in and of itself, but in a very nice compact package that is somewhat HX Stomp sized. And I think that was kind of what they were going for at the time. But you don't really hear too much about the GT1000 stuff. The one downside of the GT1000 core is that the power supply is one of the unusual blight of the tiny modeler things. So HX Stomp has a fairly dodgy one. I think this one's even slightly worse. But yeah, that's kind of one little bit of a downside. Now, the other thing is that, say, who uses a Neural DSP Quad Cortex? I imagine you might be able to think of a few people, like maybe Kiko Lororo. You might be able to think of someone like Mateus Asato. You might be able to think of someone like Corey Wong. You might have a bunch of metal guitarists that are using them. You might know that Aaron from Intervals tried one for a tour live. I think Pliny uses one live. Although you know, Neural DSP have like quite an aggressive marketing strategy where, you know, they're quite happy, it seems. I think they gave one to Jacob Zatecki even, who doesn't use it. An aggressive marketing strategy and, you know, hand in hand with paying guitarists and stuff like that to make videos with it. And I think that's quite a good thing for guitarists in general because, yeah. But yeah, so Neural DSP have really made a dent in that way. You got people like Fractal, which if you talk about Fractal, you know that there's people like John Petrucci, Steve Vai, Dweezil Zappa, you know, Neil Schon from Journey. There's loads and loads of players using the Fractal stuff live. If you said someone like Line 6, you might know that Per Nilsson's using one. You might know that the chap from Mastodon uses one. You might know, you know, there are big name users that use this stuff. I think Alex Hutchins is one guy who uses some of the GT stuff live sometimes, I think. Although I think I've seen him using a Headrush live as well, more recently. As well as Nilly Brosh, I think. But there just isn't a big kind of list of famous, influential guitarists using the Boss stuff. I think that does make a huge difference. Because if you found out, for instance, that Guthrie had been touring one of these, maybe if you're a Guthrie fan, you'd think, right, I'll give that a go, because clearly it works for him. The things that you should know about the GT1000 stuff is that the hardware is incredibly well made. You should also know that it has kind of the more powerful chipset in there and also the lowest latency and that side of things. Leo Gibson, he can point you in the direction of, you know, pretty comprehensive latency tests for all of the key modelers, and I think Boss very often comes up at the top of those lists. The other real downside, I think, for Boss that I think is why you don't see people like me or Leon Todd or so on doing too many things with is that they don't tend to update their products very often. And this has been a real key part of what it makes it interesting to continue making videos about HX Stomp, Fractal, even Quad Cortex, is that there's new amp models to check out and there's, you know, new firmware updates, there's new effects to try and stuff like that. And now the GT1000 core in terms of effects has loads and loads of great stuff, but amp models is actually a little bit lacking and probably of all of the amp modelers has the least in there. It's not to say that it can't make most of the sounds that the other modelers can, but just on the face of it, we know from Fractal that people are most interested in actual, you know, models of real life amplifiers. This is a thing that I think obviously Line 6, Fractal, Neural DSP know. Boss, they have a few real amplifiers in there that they've modelled, like the Vox and so on, the Deluxe Reverb, the Bassman and stuff like that. But they also, whilst there's only a small number of amps in there, about half of them equally are kind of Boss's proprietary amp models with their kind of that X-modded stuff. And I don't know, it seems to me that that's not necessarily a great way to sell a product. As good as those amp models might be, if the wider public rely on amp models that replicate a real world thing, if you've only got a few amp models and they are, you know, maybe about half of them not based on anything in the real world, then you might struggle. But I've endeavoured to try and do more with the GT1000 core this year. Boss did send me this one maybe about a year ago, and I did some tone sets for them across a bunch of different devices. But since people have, you know, occasionally chimed up and said, well, why don't you talk about the GT1000 core? I thought, well, maybe we'll make that something that I do a bit more of. So the tone that I was using in the intro there was Deluxe Reverb. Another thing I've done here is to use the expression pedal with it to basically, the mix is controlled with the expression pedal of the delay and the reverb, which makes it a little bit more versatile. You've got 3 buttons on here that can do, basically you can do snapshot type stuff, it just takes way longer to get that going. But what I had it set up to do, I think, was a drive, another drive, and then like a tap tempo. But you could set that up to be different per preset. I also want to explore what you can do with the control outputs, because I think with just these 3 buttons, I can't really imagine that I'd be able to use it particularly effective just by itself. But with the expression pedal and maybe a control, it might be something that could really be quite useful live. I could certainly see, I think the Boss IR2 has made me rethink some of the amp models in the Boss world. I think they are respectable. I think in some ways the IR or the AIRD thing is the thing that in some ways holds it back. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. If you've ever owned a Boss thing, what you liked about it, what you didn't. Is there a reason in your mind that Boss doesn't get talked about more in terms of the modelling stuff? I'd love to know your thoughts on that if you've got any. And do you think more people should be talking about them? Do you think there's valid stuff to love about them? I think also the GT1000 and GT1000 Core non-colour screens at a time when most of the other modelling companies were either going for full colour screens or even like with Headrush starting to do the iconography of the amps and stuff. So it does feel quite different going on this. I think some people don't like the studio editor. I think it's actually pretty good. But yeah, so I'll just run through the preset with you quickly. If it sounds particularly kind of noisy for whatever reason, it's most likely because it's a little bit dark here. And sometimes there seems to be a bit of a ground loop in the house when it's dark. But anyway. Expression pedal down for the, blending in some delays and reverbs. Then DS2 is a blues driver. DS1 is a Marshall Governor. So the other kind of things that they've got going for them, if we go into like the effects, so basically you could switch out the type of drive. So we've got a plethora of great drives in there. So for instance, for me, I really like a Marshall Governor type drive and a blues driver. We've got both of those. You don't get them in Helix, for example. Then I've got the deluxe reverb in the amp model. As I was saying, if you go through the list of amp models, we've got like Transparent, Natural, Boutique, Supreme, Maximum, Juggernaut, X-Crunch, X-High Gain, X-Modded, JC120, Twin, Deluxe, Tweed, Diamond, Brit Stack, Recti Stack, Match, BG Combo, Orange Stack, Bogner Uberschall, and then some bass stuff. Actually, probably quite a lot, but compared to other modelers, not that many. You could dual amp in here, but I've not done that in this particular preset. And yeah, just loads of effects. It's not as easy necessarily to dial stuff in. There is another expression pedal input here, which I've only just noticed. So I could set up on your drives, for example, you can have a solo setting where you have a solo switch that comes on and the solo level comes up. That's also in the amp block. So you could have like a solo switch over here, which I'm considering that could actually be really useful for live. So I think there is a bunch of good stuff in here. The speaker modeling is over here and is not necessarily the best that I've seen it done in the modeling world. But yeah, I think quite a capable unit. I think maybe deserves a little bit more love. If you're using one, let me know in the comments. and let me know how you figured out how to use it. I've got